they sent him to Baghdad. And then he was even banished from there, and he was sent by the Ottoman Empire to live under house arrest in Haifa, in what was then Palestine, which is now Israel. I've been to Haifa and seen the place where he was held under house arrest. It's where he's buried now, a mausoleum. And he spent decades under house arrest. He was eventually allowed to kind of go and visit neighbours and visit the farms and stuff. But he spent his time in scholarship, in writing. He wrote letters to all the world leaders, to Queen Victoria, to the Shah of Iran, telling them to stop war, to stop killing, to let the women be equal, to have human rights, to have democracy, and, you know, to open the gates of scholarship. I mean, he was like a real reformer, actually, and you know, a lot of what he said made total sense. And there's about 5 million Baha'is in the world today. Some of them have been my very good friends. I had several friends in London who were Baha'is. There's about 10 million today. And there's probably about 100 million in the world, since it was founded about 100 years ago. You know, and it's a lovely religion, and they have what's called fireside chats, a bit like we're doing, only they have a big roaring fire, and then they have like a group come round. And they're in most countries in the world where they're allowed to operate. I'm not sure if there are Baha'is in Russia. I doubt it very much at the moment in the current climate, or in China, but I know there are, you know, throughout the Western world. There's also a wonderful temple in Delhi, the Baha'i temple. It's called the Lotus Temple. It's shaped like a giant lotus. I've been there. It's one of the biggest temples in India. If you're ever in Delhi, go to the Baha'i temple. And the other thing the Baha'is do is they work for world governments. They work for some kind of world order to replace war. They must be absolutely crying tears at the Ukraine war and the Yemen war and so on. They think the UN should be strengthened into a kind of world governance system, so that all disputes between nations would be automatically referred to a body that would then make a judgment and be able to enforce it with some kind of world authority. They created that thing. It sits in Haifa. It's the World House of Justice, it's called. And it's like a spiritual government come from heaven, is how they see it. Gradually, one day, that will become the new world government. As yet, because people are so sunk in their own way of doing things, people haven't woken up to this. And so we're still catching up to the fact that there is a world government run by the Baha'is. They've also been persecuted, sadly, particularly in Iran, tragically, because, you know, it's like when a family member goes crazy, so they don't like the Baha'is. But I would love, as a peace scholar, I'd love to see the end of these persecutions and a discussion of a mature level between Baha'i theologians and philosophers and all the other religions, you know. So as a new religion, it's doing quite well, I would say. Okay, let's move on and look at the next one, which is Santo Daime, which is a new religion associated particularly with Latin America, and particularly Brazil. Now this is a very interesting religion. It was founded by Raimundo Irineu Serra, who's called Mestre Irineu, in Brazil. And it has a lot of Christian ideas in it. Catholic, so they like the ritual and all that. But they also use ayahuasca, which is a Native American psychedelic substance. You drink it like a tea, or a vine, like a liquid, and it takes you on an out-of-body experience. I've never done ayahuasca. It's very trendy in among the young generations nowadays. But I understand where it takes you to. I've been there. And so what Santo Daime has is substituted the Mass of the Catholic Church with ayahuasca. So you gather in a kind of big hall wearing white, and the elders will say prayers and invoke guiding angels, and then you take the ayahuasca together. And you have one hell of a spiritual journey. But it's quite blissful. You see angels, you see spiritual guides, and they've also drawn on the spiritualist ideas of Allan Kardec, the great French spiritualist that we talked about when we did spiritualism. So to explain what's going on, they kind of use that spiritualist context. But they've also drawn on African animistic teachings. There's a large black population in Brazil who've come from the African pagan traditions that do now Santo Daime, and also the native South American shamanism of the people that use ayahuasca and have done so for thousands of years. So it's a very, it's a nice, it's a great melange new religion for Brazil. And I know there are groups in Britain and elsewhere in Europe that do it. There are Santo Daime groups in Paris and Netherlands and Amsterdam that have got sort of semi-official permission to do this on the grounds of, here, we're a religion, can't stop us. We want to do our sacrament of ayahuasca. And then the state is kind of taking a slightly hands-off view, so that as a religion, they're allowed to do their practices. But that's still being kind of fought in the courts a bit. And so, but, it's interesting. And, they believe this ayahuasca is a sacred vine which comes from the divine, and that we humans have the right to knowledge. It brings the revelation. I mean, let's not argue like the New Thought people did about how to access the divine mind. Here's a vine, drink, that can take you there within a couple of hours and then leave you there for like half a day, And everybody gets a different experience, but they sure get contact with the divine mind. And so what the Santo Daime people say is, look, that solves the problem of how we can contact the divine mind. Then we don't need to worry about whether you're the right prophet or that religion or this religion. We can all contact the divine mind and plug in simultaneously. That would solve the problem of whether you should be a Baha'i or a Shia or a Sunni or anything, say the Santo Daime people. Just take the sacred vine and get with the message. And spiritual revelations will come to you individually, which are all, valid and sacred. You might need to talk to a shaman or a guide who can then decode it and explain it, because you might go to some quite dark places and see visions in your unconscious and meeting devils or demons or weird snake-looking things or chameleons that eat you or whatever. The human mind is incredibly creative, but it's also self-destructive. And so people can have what's called bad trips. Well, that's where the guide, the shaman, comes in, who is there to steer the ceremony. During the ceremony, they'll use the drum, they'll use prayers, chants, songs, to keep the energy, high. So that's Santo Daime, and, it's difficult to say, but numbers, probably about 75,000 people have been following that at the current time. Maybe about 5 million in total. Yeah, it's quite a lot, actually. Okay, now we come to another new religion, which is called Santeria, and also Candomblé. This is a tradition of African origin, African native paganism, shamanism. It was taken to the New World by the slaves of Black Africa. And they took with them the native religion of the African tribes that they came from, in West Africa particularly. And particularly they settled in Cuba, also in Salvador, in Brazil, elsewhere throughout Latin America. And they felt that they should be faithful to the original religion of their African origins. And they believe in the Orishas, which are spiritual deities and ancestor spirits. And they have various names: Obatala, Chango, Ogun, Orula, Eshu, Oshun. And these are different deities for the Santeria African religion. Now, if you're an African priest in the Santeria religion, you do a ceremony, you do drumming, burn lots of incense, and then you'd invoke with prayers these different deities whose names I've just read out. And sometimes it was felt through dance, they can then possess the worshippers. The sacred dance is a good way of leaving your rational mind going into a trance state, in which case the divine can then come in. So again, it's a question of how do you get the divine mind into the human mind? Well, dancing and music helps. But prayer and meditation. And then also the candomblé, which is a similar African tradition in Salvador and Bahia, Brazil. Their deities are called Oxala, Yansa, Orolun, Inomale, Ogum, and so on. One of my unfinished projects is to do a comparative etymological dictionary of all the names of all the gods. I'd love to know the etymology of all these names in African languages, and then trace them back. One of the most important is Fa, another is Dan. I mean, these are powerful sounds which occur in other religions. What is the etymological explanation for why these sounds are associated with deities? I've explained in my book, The Kabbalah Runes, how I think there are certain primal sounds for all languages that go to the root of the way we humans speak. I hope if I reincarnate another 500 years, then I'll finish my dictionary by then with the etymology of all the names of all the gods, because I don't think I'm going to have time in this lifetime to do it. Okay, so that's... I love the fact that it was kept faithfully by the slaves who refused, although they might have had to be baptized and go and become a Christian officially to please their masters, they kept it secretly, and they believed that trance mediums or priests are here to mediate between the gods, the Orishas, and the earth. Surrounding this earth, there are 7 semi-permeable concentric spheres populated by deities and the souls of the dead. So there's just this earth, right? This is France, hello, Africa, whatever. And then there's these spiritual earths that surround us, which are full of these spiritual beings. And the priest and the trance medium can be in touch with them. And the supreme creator of the whole thing is called Ororun. And each soul is born with a patron deity from those spheres. Well, it's all a bit like Dante's wonderful vision. And it's very similar to the Neoplatonic view in the Hermetic scriptures, which describes a similar thing in ancient Egypt. And I'm sure these traditions go back to the time of ancient Egypt, because the African Egyptians were the most intellectual of the whole continent. They would have been in touch with African tribes elsewhere. And that concept of this plurality of worlds on different spheres of being is fundamental to Hermeticism. Right, we'll do one more before our break. We'll just look at Voodoo, or Voodoo, which is number 104. Very similar to what I was just describing. It was taken to the New World by black African slaves from Ghana in West Africa all around to Nigeria. And it was taken largely to Haiti, also Cuba to some extent. And they just refused to give it up. They carried on worshipping their black African deities with secret ceremonies, usually at night, stealing out into the woods. It was big in Louisiana, and still is, because the slaves refused to stop being faithful to their deities. And it got a bad name because voodoo was supposed to be a kind of black magic. But actually it's just magic in the classic sense of people interested in spirituality using their psychic powers to try and achieve effects for the good of the person that consults them. So a voodoo practitioner, often will have a little, like a counselling service they run. People will come and say, I've just lost my baby, I'm thinking of suicide, what can I do? Well, they give them a little charm to take away, put this on your mantelpiece at night, say these prayers, and I'll do some, other stuff for you. And so it's doing ritual magic to help people live in this difficult world. And I've met people that, who've encountered this, and I've not travelled to Haiti and some of the voodoo centres, but I respect their right to follow this tradition, you know, and in a sense it shouldn't be in the new religions because it's very, very ancient. But it's in the new religions because by voodoo we normally mean the African traditions that were taken to the Americas, right? And that's why. And in my research, in the website, I've given great detail. The priests or sages are called mamas and mambos and hungan. Some famous people associated with it from history, going back to the 17th, 18th century, include Marie Laveau, Didi Sant, and many others. It's an oral tradition, but now it's become written down. The moon is called Mau, which is female. The sun is called Lisa, which is a male deity. And the Voodoo are the lesser deities and spirits which pervade the world. There are 7 daughters and sons of Mau, who is the supreme god and androgynous. And there's a very complex pantheon of voodoo deities. Eshu is seen as a divine messenger deity with a large staff and a mediator and a peacemaker. Now that's interesting because Eshu sounds a bit like Yeshu or Yeshua. And there's a strong kind of Christian voodoo overmix. So if you go and talk to a voodoo practitioner in Louisiana or elsewhere, they'll often have Christian crosses up and they'll have images of the Virgin Mary, Mary Magdalene, you know, etc., etc. To them, they're all just other holy beings. And if you pray to them all, it works better than just praying to just one or two. I mean, and they're very colourful. They believe in fecundity, love, sexuality, marriage, you know, etc. There's probably about 25 million practitioners of voodoo, it's estimated, in the world. In history, probably about 500,000 at any one time. I know there's voodoo groups in New York and London, you know, African people that are doing this. Why shouldn't they? I mean, Christians went to Africa and did their Christian thing. Why shouldn't Africans go and kind of recolonize the West? But what I love is when people come together and share their mysteries. So you get deep Christians, Hermetic thinkers, philosophers, voodoo practitioners, Buddhists, Shinto, Sufis, Shia. If we all kind of share openly what it is that we do and how we do it, then I think we'll all get home being able to contact the divine mind quicker, and that would be really new thought. I suppose you can call me a new thought practitioner, because I'm saying we don't have to like create a new religion. What we need to do is reactivate all the existing ones at their best, and then we can have instead of violence, war and Putinism, we can have a conversation of the highest enlightened mind. So that each tradition, I mean the Voodoos believe in enlightenment, they have their own words for it, you know, but they're certainly on the side of the angels. Ultimately, they use humour and seership, and all the traditions have an enlightenment equivalent. So the question is, how can we actualise that? That's what Emerson wanted, but he lived in the 19th century, he couldn't conceive of this table because he didn't have access to all the knowledge. Hegel was saying the same thing, but he again didn't have access to all the knowledge we've got now. So I think now it's time to really be scientific about this business of spirituality. Stop killing each other because we're in the wrong box, and just open all the boxes at once. You know, like the Advent cards. Let's open them all. And okay, we're going to stop there. That's part 1. Thank you very much, and I'll be back shortly.